Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. I've got another Master Duel video for you all today. So, we are coming back with yet another tier list. The last time we did one was just before the latest selection pack and ban list update rolled out, so that was more of a predictive tier list. This one will be kinda somewhat as well, as we will be factoring in some of the ban list updates that are going to be taking effect at the end of the season, but of course we don't have confirmation for what is going to be in the next selection pack just yet. We do have some leaks, some rumors. We'll talk a little bit about those. I usually don't like to talk about that kind of stuff until it gets officially announced, just in case, things might be incorrect, although the leaks we've seen so far have all been accurate up to this point. So we'll still dive into those just a little bit, but this is going to be more of where the decks are now. This is less predictive and more like this is where the tier I think definitively all these decks are in. So we're going to go ahead and go straight into it here. I'm going to start off with Adamantipator, a deck I've not really seen talked about a lot lately. I think it's really just been overshadowed by a lot of the new cards that have been coming out, like of course, the Bystials have been extremely popular, and a lot of decks that are seeing a lot of play right now are utilizing those. However, while Adamantipators don't make particularly good use of Bystials because they don't have a lot of light or dark monsters, that same factor also actually makes them pretty good against the archetype as well. Adamantipator right now in terms of power level is probably somewhere in tier 3, but in terms of representation, gotta put it down at Rogue. I don't know, that actually still doesn't feel right. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of tier 3. Adamantipator is one of those decks that never really quite gets to Rogue, even in terms of its representation, but again, just not been seeing a whole lot of it. That said, the power of Block Dragon I think will definitely push this deck out of Rogue and up into tier 3. I can just see some comments saying, I can just see the comments now like, Adamantipator's not Rogue, they have Block Dragon. So I will concede that they are probably more towards the bottom of tier 3 there. Now let's talk about Branded a little bit. This is a deck that has in some ways exceeded expectations, and in other ways not quite met the expectations that I had for the deck moving forward after it got this next wave of support. I think a lot of people, myself included, were expecting Branded to be tier 1. I actually put it in tier 2 just to err on the side of caution on the predictive tier list a few weeks ago. I think I had Tier Laments as the only tier 1 deck. It's actually not going to be the case anymore in my opinion, but again, we'll get into that in a bit. But as far as Branded goes, I had it towards the top of tier 2 in the predictive list, and I think that's where it's actually ended up here in terms of its spot in the current meta. I don't think losing one copy of Branded Fusion will change this. I think the deck is still going to be top of tier 2. You could theoretically debate that this deck is maybe the bottom of tier 1, but I really think that the deck's susceptibility to getting disrupted, particularly the Branded Fusion getting negated by Ash Blossom, is going to be enough of a check to not quite keep it in tier 1, but rather bump it down towards the top of tier 2. Again, though, I do think this is close, and I could see an argument against, putting Branded in tier 2 and putting it in tier 1 as well. Alright, let's go ahead and talk about Pendulums next. Pendulums is in, Pendulum Magicians. Of course, there are other Pendulum archetypes, but they don't really see as much play as Pendulum Magician does, and that one is definitely still, well, not tier 3, it's going to still be here in Rogue. A lot of Pendulum cards are light and dark, so even though they don't hit the graveyard too often, they do occasionally still get hit by Bystials there, although it's less of that and more just, the fact that, the deck's power level is just not quite up to tier 3 levels or higher. Really, the last major support that the deck got was beyond the Pendulum, and that was quite a while ago. That was back in, October? It was definitely, I think more than 6 months ago. So, I think we're just seeing here that, in order for Pendulums to possibly resurge back into tier 3, where they have been briefly before, I think we would need a new powerful Pendulum card. Alright, let's talk about Black Wings next. Black Wings, this is a deck that of course got supported not just very, very recently, but still recently enough, about a month ago, with the structure deck there. Were we not in a tier 0 meta at the time, could definitely see an argument for putting Black Wings in tier 3. As it stands though, I'm going to still keep them in Rogue, but definitely more towards the top of Rogue. We've definitely been seeing them fall off, at least I have been noticing less and less Blackwing decks on ladder, and just in general, and I think that's because some of the hype is kind of wearing off, although of course that Blackwing structure deck is still very good, not just for the archetype, but a lot of the cards in there can be utilized in other decks as well, like the Zephyros, the Shanga I've made use of in Bystial Sprite Synchro, so Yeah, the cards are still very good, but it wasn't quite enough to push Blackwings out of Rogue. Although, to be fair, it did take them from like the bottom of Rogue towards the top, so it was still a noticeable leap in power. All right, let's talk about Sword Soul Tenyi next. So, I'm laughing actually because I remembered when I did my predictive tier list, I put Sword Souls in tier 3, and I made a statement about how they were like decidedly tier 3. There were quite a few comments that didn't like that. I think people thought that I was calling Sword Soul bad. I say this on every single one of these tier lists, but I'm going to say it again here. No deck I'm going to put on this tier list is bad. Not a single one of them. Even if I put them in Rogue. And there are far more Rogue decks than what I'm just listing here as well. If a deck is tier 3, it's still more than capable of winning tournaments and hitting Master 1. It just means you do need to do like a little more work than tier 1, but just know that a deck that is tier 3 is still better than like literally 90% of decks out there. Probably more like 95%, honestly, or even more than that. But suffice it to say, if I call Sword Soul a decidedly tier 3 deck, it's still a really good deck. I'm not insulting it, I promise. That said, I don't know if I can actually keep Sword Soul in tier 3. It's very close about whether it's at the top of tier 3 or actually even the bottom of tier 2. The Bestials provided Sword Soul with more of a boost in power than I initially thought they were going to get. Not just in terms of disruption, but also in terms of bodies to use potentially as synchro fodder as well. The deck also runs very few light or dark monsters. Well, I don't know about very few, but it's not as susceptible to getting hit by Bestials as other decks does. Sometimes your Vishida or Ashuna might get hit by a Bestial, but that's not really ever going to be, usually anyway, going to be very game breaking. It's usually more, of course, your Moye or something getting negated that'll do it. This is so close. This is really, really close as to whether or not I'll put it at the bottom of tier 2 or the top of tier 3. But hey, maybe just to concede to calling the deck decidedly tier 3 last time, I'll just stick it in the bottom of tier 2 here. If I did 0.5 tiers, this I guess would be tier 2.5, but I hate 0.5 tiers. They're very pointless. So yeah, we'll just stick Sword Soul at the bottom of tier 2 there and call it good. Mathmech, I think I had it at the bottom of like tier 3 last time. Unfortunately, I gotta put it in Rogue. Not even necessarily in terms of power level, but more in terms of representation. Even with Bestials running around, and there are quite a few decks utilizing Bestials right now, I think even in this meta, if enough people were on Mathmech, the deck would prove itself to be at a tier 3 power level. It's just that I think I honestly, kind of myself included, if I'm being honest, are a little too afraid to try playing Mathmech now that Bestials are running rampant. Of course, the deck relies heavily on having light monsters in the graveyard, so naturally this whole new archetype that is all about banishing light and dark monsters in the graveyard is going to be a bit of a hindrance to that. That said, though, we do have Magnum Hut and Geostorm only at 1 each, so outside of decks like Branded that are playing like dedicated Bestial packages with like 3 Saronir, it's mostly decks just playing like 1 of each Magnum Hut and Geostorm, and then like maybe some amount of Baldrakes. So I think that Mathmech is more well poised than a lot of people think it is. I don't think it's like super well poised in general, but I think it's in a better spot than a lot of people assume it to be. So I'm going to put it at the top of Rogue. I really want to put this in tier 3, but I think it's going to stay here in Rogue. Punk is, I mean, you all know how much I love Punk variants. Like, if it were up to me and just how much I like the deck, it'd be in tier 1. But no, Punk is going to land in tier 2, although I might even actually put it above Mathmech, just because in terms of representation, I've been noticing that Punk piles are catching on a little bit more on ladder. I've just been seeing more of them, not just in my own personal climb, but like submitted to Master Duel meta as well. Punk piles being, a deck that utilizes a Punk engine, in addition to many other archetypes, normally Bestials, sometimes Tearlaments as well. Sometimes people throw in some like Chaos packages. Sometimes people will use Sprite, but it seems that Punk is becoming more and more popular as an engine rather than its own standalone deck. But of course, there are still plenty of Punk decks running around out there as well. So, yeah, I think it's cool to see the archetype get more representation. I do think it is quite good. Now I have to laugh again as we are now on Fluanderee's poor Flaunderies. And I know a lot of people, but based on the comments talk about the most recent ban list update, are like, good, fuck them birds. But no, even though I'm not a particularly huge fan of playing against Flaunderies myself, I don't think the deck has deserved all these hits. And yet, in spite of taking all these hits, I do think that the deck is going to still remain at tier 3. I can't remember if I had it at tier 2 or 3 beforehand, but I do think the deck is tier 3 still, even with M-Pen at 1, even with Map at 1, even with Terraforming Band, even with Prosperity at 1, even with Duality at 2, even with the, and then of course the Barrier Statue is the other one. That one, I don't think anyone's sad about the Barrier Statue being banned. Again, it seems a lot of people aren't particularly sad about Flaunderies getting hit, period, but they definitely did not deserve M-Pen to 1 on this most recent list here. But again, even despite that, I do still think the deck will be a mainstay, and I think it'll still be around tier 3. Alright, Stun. Stun is Stun. Stun is Rogue. Stun is towards the bottom of Rogue. It's like Numeron, which again we'll talk... You know what? Not even later. I'm just going to put Numeron down here as well. This is where Stun and Numeron have always been since the beginning of Master Duel, and will probably always be here towards... Well, to be fair, Stun, at the beginning of Master Duel, you could argue was closer to tier 3, just due to Skill Drain being at 3, Imperial Order and Vanity's Emptiness being legal, Rival Rating goes in, and there can be only one we're all at 3 as well. But now that the floodgates are more in check, the deck has just been sitting at the bottom of Rogue, where it should be. And again, you know, that's not to say it's a terrible deck. It does still have the ability to eke out a lot of wins. I just think that, you know, I think a lot of people think this as well, that it's just not a fun deck to play against. Same with Numeron. Numeron, you could maybe argue, is even higher than Stun, but it's pretty close. And I mean, it's the bottom of Rogue, who really cares exactly where it is these two decks on? They're, again, about the same power level. Alright, Goatee. Goatee. Good old fish. Speaking of fish, I'm just going to take a sip of water here for a sec. So, fish. Goatee. Still Rogue. Definitely still Rogue. Very much decidedly so as well. A lot of people probably aren't going to be too happy that I'm putting them way down here in Rogue. But I think Stun and Numeron are just about the only thing that I'm going to put below Goatee here. Because while the deck is really cool and it's really interesting, I do love Synchro Archetypes, and I think the whole Synchro Banish thing, the Banish Fish thing in general, is really cool. But, I mean, I think people who really love and play the deck will also acknowledge that it's not above Rogue, unfortunately. As cool of a concept as it is, it does not manage to break into tier 3 or higher. So I think a lot of my placements have been about the same so far, but this is one that's going to be decidedly different. Sprites I had in tier 2, if I recall correctly, actually, I had them like towards the top of tier 2, because I'm pretty sure I had Tier Limits as the only tier 1 deck on the last tier list, but no, I'm going to put Sprites up here in tier 1. I knew that getting Sprint was going to be a huge boost in just power overall for them, but I definitely I knew it was going to be a significant boost, and I still underestimated just how good Sprites are going to be were actually going to be post-Sprint, and we're definitely seeing a lot of examples of that on ladder now. Sprite has, even on Master Duel meta, managed to eke its way up into tier 1 alongside Tier Limits, and I wholeheartedly agree. The deck, I honestly thought Branded was going to be the better deck between the two after both got new support, just because, like, I failed to acknowledge quality over quantity, right? Like, yes, Branded got a lot of support cards, including the whole Bestial archetype, but it really was that one card in Sprint that pushed Sprite so far above the other tier 2 decks and put them actually, in my opinion, very close to the power level that Tier Limit is currently at. And I think after both decks sustain hits on the ban list, they'll both still be tier 1, and they'll probably still both be about the same power level as each other as well. Although Tier Limit, I do still think is slightly better just due to its ability to, you know, play on the opponent's turn. I think the fact that it can just play on the opponent's turn, even their turn 1 with like a Havness in hand, does make the deck still a little bit more powerful than what other decks are doing right now, but the gap has definitely shortened by a lot, and Sprite is very much closing in behind Tier Limits there. Tier Limits also, as long as I'm talking about them, just go ahead and throw up here at the top of Tier 1. Again, as I've been saying, I do think that Tier Limits are better than Sprite, but I don't think it's by a whole lot. It's definitely not by the same difference that it was before these ban list changes, as well as the selection pack that came out. So, Yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's very refreshing that we're no longer in a tier 0 meta. I actually like this meta quite a bit. There are still, some people who are complaining about tier limits, and, I think it's valid, but at the same time, I don't think they're nearly as bad as they were before. I think the hit to Solic to 1 is going to do a lot more than a lot of people realize. It just makes the deck so much less consistent, not just in terms of like getting your Solic out, but also like in terms of milling it and getting a search. That incidental search comes up all the time. And even though most decks didn't play 3, still playing 2, and then going down to 1 is going to be a significant drop. And I am honestly very much looking forward to it. I think if we just put like Havness and maybe one of the other fusers like Shiren, if Havness and Shiren both went to 1, I think tier limits would be totally fine at that power level. Obviously, that's just like speculation on my part. You'd have to do actual testing, or I guess whatever Konami does to balance the meta. But I do think that tier limits are getting much closer to a fair spot than a lot of people realize. All right, let's talk about Runic now. It's really funny, actually. When this new selection pack was about to come out, and particularly when like the shufflers got hit to 1, I saw a very small subsect of people doomsaying that Runic Stun was going to be unbearably good again, and that it was going to be as annoying as it was in the past. And you know what, I lied earlier. There is actually a deck I will put below Cody, and it's Runic Stun. I haven't seen this deck like at all, not once since at some point in the middle of tier 0 meta. I couldn't even tell you, but like Runic Stun is not much better off than its regular stun variant, wherein I don't think that these runic strategies are nearly as oppressive as, again, it was a vocal minority that was saying, like, with the shufflers at 1, Runic can run around unchecked again. It's not just the shufflers that were keeping Runic in check. Like, as with a lot of these decks, the meta and overall power level of cards is just scaling up enough that, like, Runic Fountain, as good as it is to draw 3, that just doesn't keep up, especially like a pure or stun runic strategy. And not even a Churia Runic. I haven't even seen that a single time since the ban list rotated. And that was another deck that people were saying, like, oh, that deck's going to be so annoying, fuck Runic, like, oh my god, it's going to be so... And again, just has not made a splash at all. This is going to be my I told you so moment about Runic, because like when Runic was in the throes of being hated upon widely and used more widely, even though at that point it was still bouncing between tier 3 and Rogue, at that point I made a lot of statements that, like, Runic's not even that bad right now, and like honestly just wait a couple of months and it'll be totally like fine, like in terms of like its place in the meta and its power level compared to other cards. And so many people were like, no way, that'll never be the case. Fountain has to go to 1 or this deck will never be balanced. Well, look where we are. Fountain did go to 2, and even though I did say that would be enough, a lot of people were like, no, it's still going to be too good, and it's definitely not. This is me having my I told you so moment. Don't mind me. Alright, so let's talk about Labyrinth a little bit. This is the main archetype where, I mentioned earlier in the video that, I wasn't going to talk too much about leaks. One of the earliest leaks we got is that Labyrinth will be getting 2 new support cards relatively soon here in the next selection pack. And when that happens, I think Labyrinth... it's going to be interesting. I don't know exactly where Labyrinth will be, but I suspect it'll be at the very least tier 3, but I would say it's probably going to be tier 2, honestly, if I had to guess. Right now, without the new support, Lab is Rogue. I'd probably put it around here somewhere. But again, once the Lovely Lady and the big Labyrinth Welcome come out, the deck, I think, is going to be closer up to tier 2. This is the most predictive statement, I guess, so to keep it in line with, like, this is where I think decks are currently at. I'll still put Labyrinth down here in Rogue, but just know that when the new support comes out, this will... Again, I've said this about Labyrinth, like, every time we've talked about it for the last couple of months, but now that we have some... And also the Eradicator Epidemic card getting limited, that virus card getting limited, is a pretty strong indication that Labyrinth cards are coming. So, again, for this exact moment right now, before the new support cards, Lab is Rogue. The top of Rogue, but Rogue. After the new support drops, we're really going to have to wait and see, but I think it'll be tier 2, and if not, it'll be tier 3. Alright, Exo Sisters is going to be the next deck we talk about. This deck has fallen off hard, and that is mostly because of tier limit dropping in not just power level, but overall popularity, of course, as a result of the power level of the deck being dropped. Before, we saw, well, I should say before tier limits, we'd see Exo Sister quite often in Rogue. Post tier limits, it was in tier 2 for a little while, but I think it was mostly tier 3. I do think Flaunderies was just better than Exo Sisters, but now that the deck, tier limits that is, has dropped off more, I'm going to put Exo Sisters back in Rogue. I'll put them, I guess, somewhere around the same level as where Labyrinth currently is. I don't know. It's funny. In terms of aesthetic, I think that the deck Exo Sister is cool. In terms of how it plays, I'm not a huge fan of it. So I already don't have a hugely positive opinion about Exo Sister. As far as its place in the meta right now, though, again, with tier limit not being tier 0 anymore, it's just losing a lot of popularity and honestly power level as well fast. It is still an extremely good Rogue deck, and you could even make an argument for it being the bottom of tier 3, but I'm going to keep it here in Rogue, personally. So Naturias, we already talked about them a little bit when talking about Runic, but there are also, of course, Naturia variants that are more synchro-focused and don't utilize the Runic strategy, but the archetype as a whole, Runic or not, I'm going to have to still place like somewhere down in here, honestly. Even with the Runic support, the Naturia deck just is not seeing really that much play. And even post like Mole Cricket and Camellia and all that fun stuff. Deck is still down here in Rogue. It's a very fun deck, but it is pretty much middle of the road, decidedly Rogue, if we're going to call it that. So, yeah, there is that. Sky Striker, another decidedly Rogue deck. It's definitely been a minute since this deck left Rogue, and unfortunately with the Bestials, it will continue to be, I think, a little while longer before it gets that opportunity. I still think it's better than a lot of people give credit for, but I'll put it probably around the same level as Naturias in terms of how strong of a deck I think it is. Dinomorphia, I gotta love with you. I don't even really know why I still have this in here. I couldn't even tell you the last time I saw a Dinomorphia deck. In that regard, I could even put it down here. To be honest, I think this is where Dinomorphia always was, even post-Rex term, in terms of its power level, but it saw enough play for a while that it was in tier 3 for a good minute. It was even in tier 2, I think, when Rex term very first came out, but nah, the deck is definitely still... I'll at least put it above Nuberon and Stun, but the deck is definitely still Rogue. Alright, Dragon Link. This is a deck where I feel like I've been all over the place with my opinion of it this season. First, I underestimated it, then I thought I was sleeping on it, and now I think I was right to have it in tier 3. I'm going to put it at the top of tier 3. As much support as the Bestials do give the deck, at the same time, they are also one of the deck's greatest counters. Also, just being a long-form combo deck, it is definitely still going to be susceptible to disruption overall. But tier 3, I think the top of tier 3 is still a good place for Dragon Link to be, or any deck to be in general, but it's a good place for it to be right now, and I think it is where the deck's current power level is. Salamangreat, we haven't had any new relevant cyber support to help them out recently. We are, at some point in the future, getting more Firewall cards that I know boost the power of Mathmech. I don't know how much those Firewall cards help other cyber stacks off the top of my head, but for the time being, Salamangreat's going to be just still here pretty much firmly in Rogue. So Heroes, let's talk about Heroes. Heroes, when tier limits were like tier 0 and like super duper strong, I mean, they are still very strong, but during tier 0 format, Heroes actually managed to creep out of Rogue and into tier 3, possibly even 2, but definitely tier 3, mostly on the back of Master Darklaw being very good at shutting down tier limits and also being very, or at least relatively easy to make in that deck. Now, it's kind of like gone the same way as Exo Sisters now, and in that regard, I'm going to end up putting them right next to Exo Sisters. Now that tier limits are no longer, like, so far ahead of everything else, the deck is definitely back down in Rogue. It's still one of the top Rogue decks. It's a very, very good Rogue deck, but, yeah, Heroes definitely still going to be in Rogue. Or not still, because they were in tier 3 before, but like Exo Sister, moving down from tier 3 to Rogue as the popularity and overall power of tier limits slowly declines. And then finally we have Madolche. This is just another kind of pet deck, honestly, that I'm going to put down here in Rogue, where it always has been. Madolche, I do feel, did lose its time to shine a little bit. I think more people should have jumped on it during the Tier 0 meta, because Glass of Flay still is, but also was a very, very good tier limit counter card that the archetype naturally makes. So, yeah, I think I had it in Rogue last time too, though, and that's just where it'll be staying. So here is our tier list. Overall, most things are where they were before in my predictive tier list, but we have seen a couple notable changes. The biggest of which being Sprite moving up to tier 1, getting a huge boost in power from Sprend. Sword Souls getting a bigger boost from Bestials than I anticipated. Same with Dragon Lake to an extent, but Sword Souls I do think are seeing not only enough play, but also enough success that I do think we can't put them up here in tier 2. Branded Bestial has been more middling than I expected, but not so much more that I think it's a bad deck. I just don't think it's like quite as on the border of tier 1 as I thought it was moving into the meta here. And then the other significant things that we saw were Heroes and X-Sisters dropping down to Rogue from tier 3 as tier limit sees less and less play over time. But that's going to do it for our Season 18 more definitive tier list. As always, definitely let me know what you think about this meta in the comments below. I am very much looking forward to hearing your opinion as well. But that's going to do it, so let's go ahead and move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack. You'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation. You do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now. So without further ado, this is Xlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.